Надо что-то поменять. Хотя ладно. Да ёпта, как ты... Блядь, что мне с руками? Найс. О. Так. Чего? Кого? Чё, кого? Опа. Опа, дверь закрыта. Представляете? А что делать? Блядь, я же отсюда пришел. 15, ебать, нихуя себе.
Some of our earliest experiments on the project involved placing old Half-Life 2 models in a level and walking around them in VR. These included static models of enemies, like Combine soldiers or zombies. We found that players really enjoyed being able to inspect these models, because VR let them get much closer than they'd been able to in the past. Players reported getting a sense of the true size of the characters, and would often point out details that they had never noticed before, even though they had seen these models many times throughout Half-Life 2. These reactions led us to the idea of creating an enemy that took advantage of that experience, one that required players to spend long periods of time in close physical proximity to it. But enemies typically don't let the player get near them without attacking, so we felt it made fictional sense for this enemy to be blind, and to feature non-combat gameplay as its focus. Early experiments with guiding a blind creature using sounds were immediately interesting, and gave us a way to create scenarios unique to the product. Thus, the concept for Jeff, known as the blind zombie internally, was born.
Черт. 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 Правильно? Какой дверь? Так. А где моя маска? Которую я проебал давным-давно. Уши Zen.
The Zen flora you see on the wall here, which we refer to as Zen ears for obvious reasons, animate in reaction to the same sounds as Jeff. Early in development, we would observe situations where playtesters would fail to notice Jeff becoming enraged by a sound. If the player died as a result, they felt frustrated and wronged. We worked to make Jeff's animations and sounds communicate his level of aggression to the player as clearly as possible, but if players weren't looking at Jeff, they could still be caught unaware. Adding these Zen ear growths to the environment was a way for us to help players be more aware of Jeff's reactions to sound. The Zen ears work as an extra layer of visual feedback for Jeff's behavioral state, one that lives in the environment instead of on Jeff himself.
Здрасте. О, водочка или смола? Ай, блядь. До пола достал, сука.
Last 4.
О. О. Что-то мне напоминает эта локация. Один из уровней Half-Life 2, я бы сказал. Да? 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 Извините.
Alyx,
О,
come in, Alyx.
это вечереет.
Alyx? Oh, there you are. There you are.
There's no straight shot to the vault. I'm gonna head inside and find a way out.
Почти все разрушили в Артигон, ты молодцы.
Nope. That'll kill me.
Окей. Кто там?
Alyx, Alyx, you're never gonna believe.
Right from the beginning of development, we intended to feature a variety of visually distinct Zen flora and fauna in Half-Life Alyx. But we didn't yet know how these visual elements would be used to craft interesting gameplay. Referred to internally as Zen clams, the Zen plants you would see here were originally built to add visual flavor to the world and were only lightly interactive. They would track the player's head and hands and would close tight if the player got too close. When we began working on Jeff, we wanted to find surprising new ways to use sound as a core gameplay mechanic. In particular, we wanted to make players wary of the environment around them. We realized we could use the Zen clams as a type of noise hazard by having them repeatedly snap open and shut when approached by the player. We had already placed these clams in earlier parts of the game, which meant that players would reach the distillery with an understanding of how they functioned. The introduction of Jeff changed the player's relationship with the Zen clams, as they went from being harmless but annoying to a dangerous hazard that players would need to take care to avoid.
Сука. Отлично. Еле достал. Это каких функций вообще интересно? В этих щелкающих придурков.
Hey, you with the blood on you. You with the blood. Hey, got a little situation here.
Yeah, we sure do.
You don't happen to have a gun on you, do you? Yeah, look at that. It's a nice one, too. It's nicer than mine, which is up inside this guy.
А можно его не спасать просто?
You know, I thought we had an agreement. You keep your tongue to yourself and I don't shoot you in it. Thanks.
What the hell was that?
Oh, that's Jeff.
Jeff?
Oh, don't worry. You can't see. Here's just fine. No, got an ear like Mozart.
Who?
All right, now let me help you out. All right, see you on the other side, Greenhorn. And keep your voice down.
Спасибо. Дело, мужик.
Early versions of the distillery explored a variety of methods for subtlety, teaching players how Jeff works without any explicit exposition. Though some of the training techniques were quite successful, anything less than a complete understanding of Jeff's behavior resulted in players bungling their way through this section of the game and having a terrible time doing it. Eventually, we determined that explicit training was necessary, and that's where the character of Larry came in. Larry acts as a gate, delivering critical information about Jeff's behavior before allowing the player to proceed. It's a dense learning environment and a delicate balancing act, ensuring that we deliver the rules of Jeff while still making Larry an interesting character. To spread out the exposition, you'll notice that it's distributed over a few different story beats as Larry first introduces Jeff, then demonstrates Jeff's predictable reaction to a breaking bottle, and finally explains that the player can prevent their own coughing on Zen spores by covering their mouth.
Ну, спору можно же заявить. Мистер Внимательность, блин.
There he is. Jeff, right? Watch this.
Ля какой.
See, it's totally predictable. But he would rip your arms off as he finds you.
У меня как раз пол хп осталось. Черт. Молодой человек. Челодой миловек. Ну хоть бутылки понадобится, наверное. Пиво. No one here? Здорово, Карим, здорово. Короче, я ролик начал монтировать, но мне очень захотелось поиграть в alyx. Поэтому завтра я продолжу монтировать.
Got it. Thanks.
Hey, I almost forgot. What's your name?
Alex. Alex Vance.
Hey, Alex, I'm Larry. Nice to meet you. Try not to get killed.
Окей. Неплохой шлем, спасибо. Спасибо. Я только вот эти потерял. Свой противогаз где мой, ёпта? Я его потерял. К сожалению. Кашель.
A core element of both the environment and Jeff himself are the Zen plants seen here spewing toxic gas that makes the player cough. These were not created to be merely ornamental or to support the novel VR interaction of players covering their mouth. They were added specifically to solve a long-standing challenge that we had with illustrating Jeff's personal space. One of the trickier aspects of designing Jeff was striking the right balance between perceived threat and actual threat. Many scenarios in the level forced the player into close proximity with Jeff in order to create tension. We found that these moments could be exciting, but they could also become frustrating when players accidentally got too close to Jeff and were killed unexpectedly. Players reported not understanding how close is too close. We tried a number of solutions, such as adding glowing tentacles to Jeff that acted as a visual representation of the perimeter of his personal space. Touch the tentacles and you die. Getting the look and feel of these tentacles to a satisfactory place proved challenging, however, and we backed away from the idea. Another problem we encountered was that a subset of our players quickly became comfortable around Jeff once they became adept at keeping their distance from him and avoiding sources of noise. For these players, dealing with Jeff felt trivial. He simply didn't feel like a threat to them. We discussed a variety of potential solutions to these problems, even wacky concepts, such as giving Jeff the ability to teleport to sources of noise. But it was difficult to come up with ideas that didn't feel like we were giving Jeff the ability to cheat. Eventually, we came up with the idea of having the player cough. This was appealing, as it gave us a way to make the player themselves a source of noise, thus causing Jeff to pursue them. We were also interested in making the environment more dangerous generally, and so our first experiments with coughing involved littering the level with Zen plants spewing toxic gas. Initial tests showed a lot of promise. Players now felt like Jeff was a dangerous pursuer, and they must carefully observe the environment to avoid the gas. We observed that players had a natural instinct to cover their mouth with their hand to suppress their cough. This was an affordance that VR with tracked hand controllers supported very naturally, so we implemented this mechanic right away. This still left us with the problem of players being unsure of how close they could safely get to Jeff. We realized that the earlier experiment of adding tentacles to Jeff could be replaced with a much simpler approach of attaching a toxic cloud directly to him. There were multiple benefits to this. First, it gave players visual feedback for how far they needed to stay away from Jeff to be safe. Second, it made those times when Jeff did get close all the more tense. with players now needing to commit a hand
Фазму,
to
если
bring them
думаешь
out.
зайти, то зайди,
Finally,
хорошо.
we didn't need to teach the players anything new. They could carry forward what they had already learned about toxic gas in the environment and apply those lessons to Jeff himself.
Да блять, я пытаюсь это самое. Блять, а где, сука, этот? Противогаза нету, сука.
One of our major goals in the design of Half-Life Alyx was to reach the widest possible audience. This meant developing for all of the major VR hardware in the market, as well as accommodating different sized play spaces, traversal preferences, and so on. The accessibility option that had the most knock-on effects into the design of the game, from controller bindings, to game logic, to level design, was the support of a single controller mode, for players who don't use two controllers. In this mode, reloading is performed by moving the weapon to the shoulder and pressing a button, much like arcade games which require the player to fire their weapon off-screen to reload. The flashlight was modified to attach to the primary hand, and gas masks were added so that players could muffle their coughs hands-free. Even the gun used in the final Strider battle, with its two-handed aiming and reloading controls, was modified to be operable with one hand.
А, да, поддержка одного контроллера же тут есть. Валух. Епа, 77 градусов. Я идяха горяче стала. Давай еще повыше сделаем, чтобы она нагрелась. 77. Блять, за то, что дома стало слишком жарко, яха начал еще сильнее нагреваться. Страшное дело. Атака Джеффа.
As we refined Jeff's behavior in visual design, we thought a lot about how we wanted players to feel about him. The goal was to have playtesters describe Jeff with words such as menacing, threatening, and deadly, and for that reason it became important that players not survive if they got too close to Jeff, so we decided that his attack should result in instant death. This would teach players unambiguously that Jeff was too dangerous to trifle with, but it left us with the challenge of teaching this to players without necessarily killing them. The approach we took was to give the player opportunities to witness Jeff attack and kill other characters. Early versions of the level included scenarios where Jeff and the player would encounter zombies and combine soldiers. The player could attack these enemies, or use sound to lure Jeff into place so that he could pummel them with his massive arms. This gave players an opportunity to witness Jeff's power and his method of attack without dying at his hands themselves. Unfortunately, this outcome wasn't guaranteed, as some players would opt to kill those enemies themselves, and having these other characters present was also quite expensive in terms of animation, sound, and level content. We were already grappling with the challenge of keeping this level well-paced and within scope, and so we cut these sections. But this still left us with the original problem of how to demonstrate Jeff's ability to kill without killing the player. We chose to address this by adding beats to existing animated sequences. For example, when the player opens this two-handed roller door, we added a head crab for Jeff to munch on in full view of the player. We also added a similar beat to the later elevator ride, with Jeff smashing a head crab against a wall before melting it down with acid.
Обучающая песочница. Блять, он сейчас сюда
Even though
пойдет.
Larry instructs the player on the basics of how Jeff works, we found that we needed to let players test those rules without having Jeff in their immediate personal space. If we made players first interact with Jeff face to face, they often fell to pieces and forgot the rules. They would die over and over again, and their fear of Jeff would quickly turn into frustration and annoyance. This area was created to serve as a training playground, where players can observe Jeff reacting to various sounds while remaining safe from his attacks. It contains many of the elements that are encountered throughout the rest of the level, including some falling bottles, a padlock that needs to be shot, and various types of Zen plants. Jeff remains close enough to feel threatening, but he cannot attack the player. Players can spend as much time here as they need to, and move on when they feel like they've got a good grip on how Jeff works.
Черт. Короче, бутылки, щелкающие ебальники. Все по классике. Так, ну чё, погнали. Самая лучшая часть игры, я бы сказал. Ебать, бедный хэдкраб. И чё ты встал? Привет, Настя кот. Привет. Сука. Так, съебываем. Тихо. Сука. Тихо. Не упади только. Так. Я не опоздала. Ну, минут 40 уже играю. Так что не особо. Не переживай, не опоздала. Так. Не иди сюда, блядь. А, мне туда надо, наверное. Опа.
Jeff's character design went through several significant revisions over the course of development. Just by looking at him, we wanted players to understand certain things about the character. Our first priority was to communicate his blindness. Second, we wanted the character to feel physically imposing. After all, the entire concept of Jeff had grown out of our observation that just being close to a character in VR could make for a powerful experience. Finally, we wanted players to understand the blind zombie's behavioural state at a glance. Is he feeling angry? Did he just hear something and is feeling curious? And so on. The first design that we modelled and animated was a sort of combine worker robot. The robot's face featured a holographic display that could flip between different icons that represented its state. A large piece of rebar jutted out of the back of the robot's head, sparking electricity and spewing smoke. This was meant to demonstrate that its visual sensors were impaired, making it blind. We made the robot tall and hulking. It looked heavy, unpredictable and dangerous. However, player reactions to this robotic design showed that it had problems. Players would initially focus on the head's holographic display. Parsing the face and understanding the meaning of the icons proved too challenging for players, and even worse, this element distracted from the rebar poking through the robot's head and their understanding that it was blind. Players found the robot imposing, but we weren't getting the deeply visceral reaction of fear that was desired. A trip back to the drawing board landed us with the more organic character you see in front of you. Drawing inspiration from the idea of coal miners succumbing to the black lung, we focused on the concept of a member of the Combine's Zen cleanup crew that had succumbed to the Zen infection. This gave us the visceral reaction from players which we were looking for. A human face is still visible, but the eyes are clearly decayed, communicating blindness. The organic nature of this design allowed us to lean more heavily on audio to feed back the behavioral state, with animalistic grunts and roars that came to include more human sounding
Охуенно,
elements
блядь.
over time.
Просто комментарии на монстре стоят. Да пиздос, как всегда не успеваю на начало, и во всем виноват YouTube. Вот YouTube, срань, господня. Так, подожди. Короче, я сейчас... Эту камеру надо заманить. Да иди, блядь. Так. Давление не приходит. Хотя колокольчик стоит, чтобы уведомления приходили. Может, ты не включил их просто. Так. Тут вообще ничего нету. Короче, окей. Так, а чё я тут забыл-то? Что-то спрятаться, что ли? Да ёпта. Ошибись. Минус свет? А! Минус свет. А, он идет наружу, да? Где сам Джефф стоит. А еще линия идет внутри, по-любому. Проводка в холодильной камере. Зашибись.
Toner puzzles are a useful design tool, since they force players to move around the environment and also occupy their primary hand via use of the multi-tool. In this area, the player has to aim their flashlight to navigate, point their offhand to teleport, cover their mouth to prevent coughing, follow wires with the multi-tool, and potentially pull bottles with their gravity gloves. The player has to make trade-offs as they proceed, since their two hands are overcommitted by design. One-handed players are even more overwhelmed by these many tasks. This is why we littered the distillery with gas masks the player can attach to their mouth so they won't have to use a hand to muffle their cough. This toner puzzle went through several revisions, many of which left Jeff free to roam while players worked on the puzzle. But this resulted in players having to juggle too many elements at once, and their fear of Jeff quickly turned into frustration. The solution was to keep Jeff locked up while players solved the puzzle, with his distant roars maintaining a level of tension. We were then left with the problem of how to release Jeff so the level could continue. Initial ideas involved having Jeff break out from the freezer on his own when the puzzle was complete, but this felt contrived and scripted compared to having the player free Jeff from the freezer. The toner puzzle mechanic gave us a logical solution to this problem, with the added benefit of creating a moment of high tension for the player when they realize they're going to have to open the freezer door and release Jeff in order to proceed.
Стать подписчиком твоего канала. А что ты снимаешь? Просто у меня так много подписков. Подписчиков. Писсиков. Ага. Придёт открывать. Оу, щит. Надо бутылку взять. Не, ну я гений. Блять. Так, тихо.
Many of our ideas for Jeff involved coming up with plausible ways to force Jeff and the player to occupy an enclosed space at the same time. An elevator ride was on the table from the beginning, but we were unsure of how successful it would be in execution. There was also a concern that such a sequence could be technically expensive to pull off. Our first prototype was extremely rudimentary. Players would get into an elevator with Jeff, the ride would last around 30 seconds, and then Jeff and the player would exit. There was no complicated level scripting, no bespoke animations for Jeff, and no special audio or lighting treatment. Despite the relative lack of polish, players had a strong positive reaction to the sequence, even naming it a highlight of the game when we ran company-wide playtests. This convinced us that it was worth putting more work into the elevator ride to make it something really special. In the end, a lot of different disciplines came together to create the final sequence, which combines sound, animation, scripted lighting, and careful choreography of Jeff's movements and the player's actions.
Да, так, игры для мобильных устройств, много мата, дикого вора. Цель 30. Что после 30 подписчиков будешь делать? Как соберешь? Подожди. Я думаю, ни хрена себе, это яхта тут горит, что ли, уже? Блядь. На кнопку надо нажать, ёб твою мать. Опасно. Ваня нажал. Продолжай снимать видосы. Не, а сколько? Ебать. А после 30 подписчиков ты сколько хочешь потом набрать? Ой, друг Джефф, блять, ёб твою мать. Ни хрена он его разъел, пиздец. Кого-то его смяло, блять. Так, тут что-нибудь есть? Ебать, это рука муравьиного льва. Жесть. Да что такое было? Так, мне в ту дверь, я так понимаю. Нет, она закрыта. Сука. Ох, блядь. Надо бежать, я так понимаю. Да открой ты, блядь! Дверь нахуй, ты ебанутая, что ли? Сука, блядь, конченая.
Most of the time, the noises that attract Jeff are created by the player, who is either actively trying to lure him to a new location, or has perhaps made a noisy mistake that could have been avoided. The key point being that the player feels some amount of responsibility for the noises being made. The goal of the upcoming hallway was to flip that idea on its head, if only for a moment. Like a misbehaving pet, this cheeky headcrab appears to surprise and infuriate the player, clumsily knocking over a series of bottles before escaping into a vent. Classic headcrab nonsense. We were surprised to find that many players wanted to check and see if the headcrab had indeed escaped. They would climb up onto the boxes and crane their head up into the vents. This prompted the idea of adding a small Easter egg to reward those players. Try it, and you'll find that the cheeky crab has indeed escaped to be annoying another day. The cost of adding these sorts of secrets needs to be weighed against the potential for players to actually discover them. In this case, our playtest observations made the cost appear worth it, in particular for the impact it would have in making the world feel more real. A full reality where living creatures go about their lives, even if the player isn't there to witness them.
В целом сотка, а потом забросить, либо потом работа. Но у меня тоже была такая мысль после того, как я вернулся с армии, начал работать, забросить канал уже, потому что все равно активности здесь нету. Но, как говорится, свободное время есть, так что можно и дальше снимать и стримить. А, реально. Можно голову залезть туда. Прикольно. Странный хэдкраб, нахальный. А, подожди, тут тоже можно было пройти. О, ля. Сука, с бутылкой бегает, а? Утвар. Может, без комментариев бы и не понял, что там хэдкраб есть. Найс. У вас 5 смолы уже. Что там больше ничего нет? Ай, сука. Защелкали мрази. Сука, хуйня взрывающаяся. Чуть не попался. Ну, комбайны, блять.
Alex, coming in. Hey, Alex. Oh, there you are. Can you hear me?
More or less. You're breaking up.
I think you're still in the distillery.
I made a friend named Jeff.
Well, that's great. We can take all the help we can get.
Yeah, we're not really close.
Listen, there should be a big tunnel-sized plug in the floor there somewhere. That's gonna be...
The tunnel out of here?
Correct. You get it open, I'll figure out where it leads.
Да, сука, что? 3 ячейки? Серьезно? А, ну давай. 3 ячейки, так 3 ячейки.
Since the entire premise of Jeff hinged on keeping Jeff and the player in close proximity to each other, the distillery map was constructed as a series of chambers connected by one-way transitions. Early on, we used 2 techniques in concert to keep Jeff and the player together throughout the level. First, each new area was gated with a special locked door. These took the form of impenetrable Zen membranes that only Jeff could tear through. The player would lure Jeff to the membrane using sound, and Jeff would break it open so that both Jeff and the player could proceed. We had always had a goal of having players describe Jeff in adversarial terms, as a constant pursuer or a thorn in their side. The problem with the Zen membrane concept was that it led to players describing Jeff as a useful tool, or worse, an angry co-op partner, rather than something they feared. Another way that we would keep Jeff and the player together was via the use of one-way drops. Jeff would fall off catwalks, platforms, and ladders into each new area. These drops functioned as intended, but just like the Zen membranes, elicited an undesirable reaction from players, especially when repeated multiple times. Watching Jeff do these pratfalls left players feeling like he was less dangerous. They felt sorry for him, and even laughed at him. Eventually, we realized that we could use combined force fields, which the player cannot pass through, as a way to create one-way doors. These force fields allowed Jeff to move through them, but required the player to follow via another one-way path. This allowed us to build thresholds where Jeff and the player could both move forward while eliminating the awkwardness of the Zen membranes, and avoiding the repeated falls that had previously made Jeff look so clumsy. Combined force fields also had a few other benefits. For one, they gave Jeff a convenient way to take a backstage route that is inaccessible to the player, like the one at the bottom of this ladder. They also tied in nicely with Jeff's fictional background as a former member of the Combine Zen cleanup crew.
Да, как он так мутировал, интересно еще. Привет, Ника. Ладно. Сука, кашлянула. Вытащись. А где карман, блять? Сука, игра, блять.
Creating an experience with such a heavy focus on audio presented some unique design problems. The primary challenge was determining which sounds Jeff should be able to hear and making sure that players understood the rules. Half-Life Alyx contains a vast array of physics objects. However, through playtesting we found it best to use only a small set of them in the distillery. We needed to pay close attention to each object that we did include, particularly to audio design for collisions between the object and the various surface types used in the distillery. It was important that what players heard matched their expectations for how Jeff would react. In early testing, we would find individual cases where players would say things like, "I don't know why Jeff got angry," or "I would have expected that noise to attract Jeff." Over time, we identified these cases of confusion and addressed them one by one. It was vital that players always be able to identify the cause and effect of a noise that might attract Jeff. Failing this meant players were left feeling like Jeff acted randomly and they'd grow frustrated. Some experiments failed in this area. At one point, parts of the level were littered with piles of broken glass that would make noise if the player walked or teleported over them. Few players would notice the broken glass and were then surprised when Jeff attacked, so this concept was cut to avoid confusion. We had to be wary of the opposite case too, where players would expect purely aesthetic elements to present a noise hazard. For example, at one point we had placed shallow pools of water seeping in among the floor tiles. It looked really cool, but it confused some of our playtesters who thought that the sound of their footsteps splashing through these puddles would be audible to Jeff, even though we never intended that to be the case.
Вернулся из деревни. О, и как? Как в деревне? Там жарко? Или нет? О, наконец-то. Респиратор нашел. Полезная штука очень. У нас, кстати, уже в эти выходные жарко стало. Понимаю. Типа я только так смогу. Блять. Пошел отсюда. Чё мне там надо снять-то? Блять, еле успел. Отлично. Very good, хули. Писаная ячейка. Теперь не разбиваются. Так, что еще тут у нас? Он смолу вижу. Блять, ну прям на бутылку, охуеть. Понимаю. Блять, я криво кинул, что ли? Так. нахуй. Я тут Да, Стас, я уже на самом интересном моменте в игре попал уже. Так, здесь я все сделал. Эту забрал. Один респиратор. Так, тихо. На тоненького, ребята. На тоненького. Блять! Ёбаная бутылка, сука. Разотная. Блядь, там эти хуйни. Тупо найс, тупо кек. Оп. Сюда лут. Ага, конечно. Господи, блядь. Алекс, что ты меня пугаешь? Та-та-та-та-та-та-та-та-та-та. Ну как в первый раз реально с ним сражаюсь, как будто. Блять, а чё почему субтитры не сломались-то? В одну сторону они показывают. Так, а третий энергия блока где у нас? Я его не помню. Бля, чел, иди отсюда. Третьего. О, а вот и третий. Ой-ой-ой-ой, не сюда же, блядь, в обход надо было идти. Ой, сука. Ну конечно, блядь, ты же его засосешь еще. Мать твою. Окей. Меня вообще слышно? Вроде да. А почему меня Ника игнорит тогда? А? Так, тут кто-то у нас бухать любит, понятно. Оп, оп, оп. Ой-ой-ой. Так.
And there we go.
Готово. Опа.
That's Jeff. Keep your voice down.
Oh, okay. I don't like Jeff.
Так, окей. Теперь по порядку. Давай, Джефф, поиграем. Последняя наша игра. Смерть Джеффа. Так, мне надо что сделать с этой хуйней? Эй, Джефф! Хочешь в мусорный контейнер? Я приглашаю вас в мусорный контейнер погулять. Ну, иди давай. Блять, придурок, иди сюда. Твою мать, блять. Сука. Иди туда нахуй. Все, иди, долбоёб. Давай, удачи. GG's.
Figuring out how to end the player's journey through the distillery involved a lot of discussion about how players would ultimately end up feeling about Jeff. Observing playtests told us that most players simply wanted him dead, usually from the moment they met him, but there were some who felt kind of sorry for him and didn't necessarily want to see him killed. Our first version of the ending involved the player's actions unintentionally resulting in Jeff being attacked and dragged away by antlions. Part of the goal was to demonstrate that the antlions are even more powerful than Jeff, to amp up the tension just before players have to square off against antlions themselves. This ending left players feeling a little empty. They felt detached from Jeff's demise and wanted to be more directly involved. Dark stuff, to be sure. Plus, we weren't really servicing those players who felt sorry for Jeff and didn't necessarily want to see him killed. There were other problems too. The antlion attack felt random to many players, which reduced its impact. And because Jeff presumably died off-screen, players were left without a sense of closure. This prevented players from being able to switch gears and settle in for their encounter with the antlions. The trash compactor was a solution to these problems. It gave players the opportunity to decide Jeff's fate and be left with a sense of closure whether they decided to squash him or just leave him imprisoned. Even so, it has to be admitted that most players seem to crush Jeff with zero hesitation.
Сука, его можно было ставить. Блять, точно. Вот я монстр, конечно. Капец, вот это я ублюдок, да? Я, ебать. Бля, споры до сих пор работают, понимаю. Песор задавило, блядь. Прощай, Джефф. Капец, да. Вот это бездушное чмо получается. Убиваю ради выгоды. Да уж. Какой я плохой. Ай-яй-яй-яй. Ладно.
Whoa, what did you do to Jeff?
Yeah, I trapped Jeff in the trash compactor. And then I crushed him.
God damn! Well, I hope you came across some of the good stuff. See you around.
Да, давай.
The coast is clear. Time to get that plug open so we can get through those tunnels.
Да, вытаскивайся. Нет, не видел, Саня, привет. Не видел клип новый.
Good news. That tunnel heads to the vault.
Great. Also, little heads up. I think the tunnel is full of antlions. Just in case I cut out permanently.
Antlions. Antlions.
Yeah, you know, aliens with stabby legs.
Oh, yes. And very small, like ants.
No.
Like tiny little lions.
No, that's not them. These ones are pretty dangerous.
Right. Well, whatever they are, they're down that tunnel.
Yep. Off I go.
Ну, хоть патронов дали. Спасибо на этом. Кто закрыл? Ебать, светлячки. А як темно. Жесть. Опять хоррор начался, да? Жесть. О! Товарищ в берцах лежит. Бедный потоварищ. Super Soldier. У вас ничего нету, ребят, да? Привет, бегемот. По помойкам, как бомжары. Ну, я бомж, потому что... Блин. 8 глава. Ну, с Джеффом я разобрался за 1,5 часа почти. Нормально. Быстрее, чем в прошлый раз, наверное. Теперь я могу не бояться разбитых бутылок, как свою смерть. Спасибо. Так, ну чё, погнали дальше. Что у нас тут? Ага. Пустая записка. Понял. Хорошо.
You know, Russ, I'm sorry I didn't get you any vodka back there.
That's okay. Well, you could pick up some on the way back.
Водку я не взял. Ну, бывает. Куда опускаешься? Так. Замурчательно. Давай сюда. Кто хочет гнилое яблоко, ребят? Видите, какое аппетитное яблоко? Особенно вот в этом месте. Пальчиком туда посувать. Тю-тю-тю-тю. Охрененно же, да? Реально прокачал полностью. На максимум силы, блять, прокачал. Так, что мне осталось по пистолету? Слушай, а что, реально можно...
No, what do they say about resin, Russ?
Look for more resin.
Okay. I'll keep an eye out.
Yeah, that's the one. Look for more resin.
Спасибо за подсказку, Рассел. А чё, по сути, там можно, наверное, все прокачать, да? Если внимательно искать всю смолу. А то мне в тот раз не получилось все прокачать-то. Ну, пушку я прям на максимум прокачал. Типа, смотри, какая бомба теперь, ебать. В прицел смотреть можно и вот так вот. Я и хотел на максимум прокачать, потому что она мне нравится, по сути. Так. Блять. Как это происходит? Да ёпта! Просто хочу пушку закрыть. Смерть Джеффа. Так. Остался пистолет. Окей. Мы просто играем в жизнь. Ага. Ряд тут успокоительных, кстати. Или что это такое? Не любишь хорроры с плохим концом? Представляешь, а есть такие, да.
That's an antlion, Russell.
That's an antlion?
Yes. So you do know what antlions are.
Yes, they're leggies.
Нагастики. Хорошее название. Для этих. А где я пулемет слышал? О. Это смола. Это ж смола, ребят. Короче, такая тема. Я сейчас... Вот он, пулеметик. Ля. Те самые пулеметы из Half-Life никак не поменялись. А каким образом я оказался с другой стороны? Хотя я прошел пару метров. Ну ладно. Допустим, что так. Ебать, они огромные, пиздец. Они реально очень огромные. Страшные, огромные львы. О, привет, малютка. Как это? Ух ты, сука. Повезло тебе. Поздно выстрелил. У меня выстрел с задержкой произошел. Ебать ты легкий, братан. Дай патроны. Все, иди отдыхай дальше. Так. Оу, щит. Это кто вообще? Закрыто на обслуживание. Похоже на череп тигра, что ли? Ага. У тигров в 6 раз лучше зрение, чем у людей. Адаптированное. Диктор говорит. А тут есть что-нибудь, кроме хэдкраба? Вроде ничего не подсвечивается. О, работник зоопарка, что ли? Ну как люблю лутаться в этой игре, вы бы знали. Такой приятный процесс. И отстреливать бушки зомбарей. Ставлю свое очко, что Алиха там это как бы... Ага, да, все правильно. Алиха как бы это там. Только не понял вообще ничего. Дим, может попку мне скинешь? Попку тебе скинуть? Ну давай, скину. Скину попку тебе. После стрима. Обязательно. Блядь, в дырку такой суешь, блин. А я могу после смерти его расчленить дробовиком?
3 shells left.
Найс. Так. А все что ли, да? Подожди. А я точно все проверил? Тигр рассматривает людей как угрозу или пищу, понятно. О, ща что будет? Бой с муравьиными
In some of our
львами.
early experiments bringing Half-Life 2 enemies to VR, we found that antlions in particular showed promise and were interesting to fight, but tended to quickly overwhelm playtesters. They were able to get into the player's physical space too quickly, and applied so much pressure that players just ended up endlessly teleporting around trying to get away. Around the same time, we were discovering that all players, even relative novices, have surprisingly good aim in VR. The variability of aiming ability amongst players is simply much lower in VR than it is in mouse and keyboard games. To take advantage of the idea that players would consistently be able to make precise shots, we started testing an antlion design which players could slow down by shooting off the legs. Playtesters reacted positively to both the need for accuracy and the organic feeling that this gave the antlions when their legs flew off and the injured antlion continued to limp toward them. The removal of the legs was clear to players, but presenting the fact that the abdomen was invulnerable until the legs were removed was a long-standing challenge. There was no single solution to communicating this effectively to playtesters, but rather a series of small additions that communicated the behavior. For example, we made the abdomen dull and black when invulnerable, and changed it to match the bright orange legs as it became vulnerable. Shooting armored parts of the antlion would generate sparks and hard ricochet sounds, while shooting the vulnerable body parts resulted in orange blood spurts and soft impact sounds. We also designed the death animations to emphasize the abdomen exploding, and ensured that an exploded abdomen chunk was left behind after the antlion was dead.
Так, вижу смолу. Ага. Ребята, сейчас что будет? Я сохранюсь, пожалуй. Там она, ну, в риле слово пацана даешь. Ну, я тебя понял, да, что ты побровный. Я тебе верю даже. То на того. Алекс того, да, уже давно. На самом деле. Давайте, подходите. Ебать, музло пошло. Сзади меня никто не идет случайно.
Last one.
А, блядь! Ты близко подошел, нахуй. Сука. Слишком близко было. А, все что ли? Хорош. Мега хорош. Бля, тут такие скалы стоят, еще они так со стороны обходят, подходят. Ух, сука. Страшно так-то, бля. Так, подожди, тут дверь вроде была какая-то, нет? Или не было никакой тут двери? Или тут только зоопарк? Для кого только тут зоопарк? А ну-ка, иди сюда, бля. У тебя патроны есть, нахуй? Нихуя тебя нету. А того челобарика. Иди сюда. За жопу тебя... Нет, у него не было ничего. Понятно. Понимаемо. Внимательность мое второе имя, ребят. Держу в курсе. Окей. Нихуя. Держу это на всякий случай. Вдруг что. Хотя вроде больше никаких споров не должно быть потом по игре. Это будет моей дополнительной защитой. Пусть будет. Ага. Понял. У них, кстати, раскрас такой прикольный. Да не двигай ты рукой, сука. Да, слишком узко, понимаю.
Any news on the data pod?
Your dad's head's down. He's working on it. He's got to be close.
Great.
Наверное, надо было туда лучше пойти. Видимо, продолжение прохода. Кого тут держали? Кого-то тут держали. Зверя какого-то. Или нет? Блять. Вот как это произошло опять? Я же просто взял малу. Я же просто взял смолу, мазафака. Кого-то засосало тут. А, понял. Хозяева экосистем. Запомните, ребята. Мы хозяева экосистемы. Потому что мы тоже хищники. А, подожди. Не, мне все-таки не сюда надо было. Хрен ли. Вот сюда мне надо было. Так, сейчас у нас тут барнаклы появятся. Да-да-да. Ничего не дропнулось даже, понимаю. На, кушай. А еще. Так, стоп. Стоп, давай сюда зайдем. Что у меня текстурки так моргают. Оу. На себе. А, я понял. Чтобы мне патроны не тратить зря, да? Ну ладно. Как получилось, так и сделали. Окей. Оп. О! Как я здесь пропустил патрончик. Своеродные пульки. Бля, немножко оглушило меня, конечно. Но я думаю, ничего страшного. Ни хера нету. Ну-ка, стоп. Не наебешь меня? Ля. Большая весело. Дай, возьми дробовик. А где? Так. Хорош чертовка. Оп.
All of the foliage in the game animates in response to player touch and environmental wind conditions. The foliage animation is entirely procedural and is computed on the graphics processor using vertex shader deformation. A voxel field that travels with the player's body is used to track the location of the player's hands in space. The hands effectively draw motion trails into this voxel field, which can be sampled by the foliage's vertex shader and used to drive deformations, allowing the player to bat the foliage around with their hands. The foliage also interacts with wind, allowing us to give ambient motion to the plants. In order to accommodate a range of environmental design, we tuned the wind deformations at different speeds, from slight drafts to hurricane force winds. It turned out, though, that the ambient wind was never required to be more than a moderate breeze, and for most of development, the hurricane effect was unused. This particular zoo habitat was added late in development and required a critical extension to the procedural foliage animation system. Prior to adding this habitat, the foliage didn't need to deform in response to enemy animation or grenade explosions, but of course, this area is all about throwing grenades at zombies. To address this, we added a low-resolution voxel field that could be sampled by the foliage shader to apply additional deformations. This low-resolution voxel field, which is about 1 cubic foot per voxel, is fixed in space and spans the entire habitat. For comparison, the voxel field that travels with the player is about 2 cubic inches per voxel. Enemies and grenades within this space can write motion trails and impacts into the low-resolution voxel field, which are ultimately interpreted by the foliage shader as wind forces. This is when preparation met opportunity. When grenades explode, they are creating localized hurricane force
Как
winds.
ты понял это, Саня, что это Россия? Серьезно? Я вроде могу здесь пройти. Ладно. Допустим. Хавай гранату. Блять, пиздец. Не со мной гранаты умирают. Окей. Это хорошо. Что? Кто рычал? Как хорошо, что тут гранаты Зен бесконечные. Опа, вояка. Или кто это? А, это охранник, наверное. Какой вояк? Блять! Ты охуел, что ли? Ты что тут делаешь? Я тут думаю, что я слышу, блядь? Давай. Давай свою брику. Вот, сука. Вау, как удобно. Все видно. Пиздец. А моя маска упала, да? Ай, хуй с ней, короче. Блять, надо что-то потяжелее взять.
Russ, do you think a head crab could turn a gorilla into a zombie?
Honestly, if there's a gorilla on the loose, I'm not sure a head crab's gonna make it much worse.
Бля, хилок так много дают. Блин, в квартире так жарко, ёб твою мать. А, тоже разбито стекло. Привет, дружище. А, музыки похуй, понятно. О, найс. Взорвался, тварь. Блять. Понял. Чуть не убился. Чуть опять не умер.
I got something. What is it?
Yeah. What is it, Dad?
It doesn't look like they actually built the weapon. It's like they, I don't know, discovered something. Or maybe they uncovered it.
What do you mean?
If I'm reading this right, they tracked it to an old apartment building in the QZ. But instead of going in to get it, they grabbed the whole building and built a vault around it.
Holy crap. They must have been terrified of this thing.
I'm trying to figure out whether we ought to be.
Ну да, стоит бояться, я думаю. Слева красиво. Опа. Спасибо. Что-то не додумался сразу так сделать. Она сама разбилась с высоты. Так. О, патронов-то много стало. Скоро будет, походу, перестрелочка какая-то дикая. Или не будет. Я не знаю. Возможно, не будет. Опа. Как хорошо сюда зашел. И удачно. Очень удачно. Так. Окей. А ну-ка, что в ведре? Ничего. В ведре ничего нету. Они тебе патронов дают. Ой, я скример. Ты как туда попал? Понял, там вентиляция. Поспать решил, чел. Ну ты решил поспать, понятно. Сука, тяжелая мразь. Патроны дай. Нет у тебя патронов. Ебать, Half-Life Alyx проработан, но из-за этого не ощущается дух сорса.
There were very few existing antlion sounds to work with coming into Half-Life Alyx, so unlike most of the familiar Half-Life creatures, which often had legacy sounds layered in, nearly all of the sounds for the antlions were completely new material. Starting with an almost blank canvas, we drew inspiration from the behavior of the antlions to inform their sound design. Since the antlions attack in waves, it seemed reasonable to us that they communicated and organized into groups for attack. This idea led us to incorporate complex insect-like clicking sounds, the final version of which began as recordings of European starlings, which turned out to provide more variation and character than insect recordings. Here you can hear the original European starling sounds.
Понятно.
We took those recordings and layered them with designed elements to create the antlion sounds used in the game.
Опа. А я говорил, скоро будет бойня. Давно с ними не стрелялся. Просто нереалистично сделано, ну конечно. Это ж такую игру сделали, типа. Еще она масштабная, HL в VR, конечно, почему не сделать такую проработанную игру? Блять, что они долго стреляют по ним. Давайте, давайте, да кончайте их все. Да сколько их там? Где он? Готов. Все? Все готовы. Бля, я забыл проверить второй этот. Ладно. Изи. Тупо АИМ. 100%. Поняли, да? А где наш друг, который тут валялся? А, вот он. Побольше патронов этих бы взять. Чё? Я не взял? Подожди. Что-то забыл здесь. А чё тут два хода? Куда мне идти? Слишком много ходов. Что-то вообще непонятно.
In traditional games, analog controls like levers, dials, and crank wheels usually play simple animations in response to a player's mouse click or key press. In VR, however, players with tracked hand controllers expect to be able to control analog interfaces by grabbing and moving them directly. To support this, we developed a new system that we call Anim Interactables. The opening mechanism of this health station is a good example of an Anim Interactable. To your left and right, you can see some more examples, such as a large railroad switch, the Vortigaunt's fire alarm doorbell, a crank wheel, a rolling cabinet door, and both the antenna and tuning dial on the radio. Anim Interactables like these allow us to give the player control of analog interfaces while constraining their input to an authored range of motion. The system uses the position and orientation of the player's hand to drive the animation of a model which defines the analog interface. As the player moves their tracked controller, the Anim Interactable continuously performs a search to determine if playing the animation forward or backward will place the interaction point closer to the tracked controller's position in space. This allows the player to drag the animation forward, backward, or hold it stationary. The result is an intuitive correspondence between the player's body and the virtual interface. Furthermore, these interactive animations don't necessarily have to make physical sense. Artists simply animate the range of motion they want the player to be able to control. These Anim Interactables have their debug visualizations turned on, so you can see the authored range of motion, including the nonlinear paths used on the railroad switch, the health station, and the crank wheel. Anim Interactables allowed us to make all kinds of objects in the world interactive, from mundane man-made devices to intricate combine mechanisms, without the need to run complex physical simulations. Feel free to play around with the Anim Interactables in this area before moving on.
Я уж поэкспериментировал, спасибо. Так. Походу у нас тут несколько ходов теперь. Многоходовочка получается. Правильно? Ну что ж, слушайте, вообще несложно находить эти самую смолу. Так. Спишь? Он, походу, заснул здесь. Ебать мой хуй. Понял, принял. Мины активировались. Угу. На обратном пути разминирую. Нет. Я лучше здесь подожду. Окей. Спасибо. Облегчил мне задачу. Так, вообще мне хп есть, так что... Товарищ, можно вас изнасиловать? Иди отсюда. Еще не было, надеюсь. Ля какой червячок. Это вроде такие в эпизоде 2 встречаются, которые тоже хилят. Немножко. Немножко. Так, кстати, забыл совсем про это. Last one. Bitch. Ебать. Не зря патронов дали. Я, бля, подожди, а чё я с пистолета-то стреляю хотя бы? А ты чё, блядь, прилип? Прилип. О, нихуя здесь что стоит. Опасные бочки.
Prison. What now?
Wait, Dad, what?
It's not a vault. It's a prison. They didn't build it to keep us out. They're trying to keep something in.
Keep what in?
I don't know. I'm not sure if this data part even knows. But they got something trapped in there.
Whoa. Okay. So if it's not a weapon, are we still doing this?
The way I see it, whatever's
Я
in
не
there,
собирался хилить, там я же не смогу
we
хилить.
got that in common.
True.
So, are we still doing this?
We've come this far. I say we keep going. And if you find out it's something we really shouldn't mess with, we'll call it off.
That's my girl. I'll let you know what I find out.
Сука.
Last show.
Да хули не все взорвалось-то? Я вроде пистолет выбирал, почему мне в дробовик взялся? Вот это вот не понимаю. Ну ладно. О, щит. Головоломка с проводки. О, да, сейчас будет головоломочка, это я помню.
Sometimes large chunks of a level are shifted around or reordered as we work on the game. That's the case for this entire area and the Toner puzzle it's centered around. In fact, for much of its existence, this area didn't even have a home anywhere in the game. It was originally built just to help prototype the Toner puzzle mechanic. Over the course of a few months, the raw gameplay mechanics of Toner puzzles were developed and playtested in a series of small test levels. Each test level explored a single gameplay concept. Those were things like using the Toner puzzle to draw the player's eyes to something interesting, such as Zen flora and fauna, creating moments of surprise when an enemy head crab popped out of a vent, or requiring the player to thread their arm and hand in behind pipes or other tight spaces. Once we figured out which of these ideas were working well, we combined them into a single test level with the Toner puzzle that strung all these concepts together in one single puzzle. Further playtesting in this level made us confident that Toner puzzles should be included in the game, and we started adding them into other areas. But we didn't include the test level itself anywhere in the game. It wasn't until later that it became apparent that the zoo was in need of a pace break. We pay careful attention to player fatigue when we playtest, and look for cases where a puzzle or some exploration and resource gathering can be used to give the player a break from combat. There was such a need toward the end of the zoo level, and thankfully in this case we were able to make use of the Toner prototype level that had already been...
На самом деле я вообще не устал, я чисто вижу, что только 3 врагов могу в одно время уничтожить. Но этого мне недостаточно почему-то. Так. А, мне вот сюда надо будет потом залезть точно. Будет весело. Сообщение удалено отправителя. Блин, какой же YouTube, конечно, прикольный. Прям как в WhatsApp или в Viber удаляет сообщение, так же светится. И такой... Конечно, если ты это видел, сообщение, другое дело. А если в Viber написали, потом удалили, такой думаешь... Что за сообщение чел удалил? Интересно. Бывает и такое. А, все-таки какие-то споры появляются. Так, хорошо. Допустим. Ключевое соединение. Мне кажется, надо было с той стороны это брать. Ладно.
For example, the newly developed explosive Zen bloaters were added at various points along the puzzle to surprise players and remind them that they need to keep an eye out for these hazards. Also, in the intervening months, the toner mechanic itself had evolved from one where players merely push a ball of energy along a path to one which included branching paths and rotating junctions. This junction here in the breaker box is the linchpin of the whole puzzle, as the player must interact with it 3 times. Once to open the roller door to this back area, once to switch power away from the roller door to the last leg of the puzzle, and once to reopen the roller door in order to exit. Because this toner puzzle covers such a large physical area, including some zombie combat in the middle, players frequently lost track of the correspondence between the state of this junction and the roller door. This meant that they would trap themselves back here and not understand how to proceed. To address this, we made a lot of changes to the presentation of this junction over the course of development. The unique breaker box and tangle of conduit are designed to make the junction recognizable as the same junction from both sides of the wall. The shape of the hole in the wall and the orientation of the breaker box are designed to make sure that the player stands in the right location to have line of sight to the roller door and see that it closes when they route power away from it to the last leg of the puzzle. The door itself also makes a lot of noise and an unreasonable amount of sparks to draw attention to itself each time it moves. This particular puzzle twist was in danger of being cut for a long time, but with this series of refinements, enough playtesters understood its behavior that we were comfortable with shipping it in the final game.
Хочу немного член подрочить, чтобы лютом быть. У меня такая же, кстати, мысль была сегодня, но я решил постримить Half-Life Alyx. Поэтому пока без дрочки обойдемся. Так, ну типа я понял, конечно, все, но откуда мне светить-то? Я вообще-то как-то и не понял, с чего начать-то. Отсюда. Ну да, отсюда и надо было начинать. Ну да, все правильно. Так. Так. Вижу. Ой, блядь. Съебали. Эти прыщи сраные. Блядь, я не понимаю. Я вот тут специально же посмотрел, чтобы они все взорвались. Так, синяя линия пошла. Кто еще хочет говна захавать? If here go home. No more animals. Окей. Кто спрятал здесь смолу, а? О, патрончики. Окей. Не влезает. Ля, какой тигр. Упс. Бррр. Можно было не дровояком это делать, ну ладно. Посчитал себя слишком крутым. Да блять, возьми пистолет. Охуенно, блядь. Сука. Что за ублюдство было сейчас? Так, мне пока хилка не нужна. Блять, это было близко. Спасибо каски, нахуй. Пиздец, каска мне сейчас спасла, реально. Не зря я с ней ходил все это время. Блять. За игру захожу. Здорово. Можешь письку нарисовать. Да, без проблем. Сейчас назад пойду только. Потому что я назад точно пойду. По-любому. Подожди. Я что-то не провел? А, ну да. Опять я по линии не прошел, да? Сука. Потом опять... А, понял. О! Уел, что ли? Так, сейчас будет пизделовка. С уёбками. Если я правильно помню. А где? Ладно. Я у мамы художник. Кривая писька, конечно. Конечно, мужскую, ты чё? А как женскую рисовать? Я ни разу не видел письку женскую, поэтому не могу нарисовать. К сожалению. Так, стоп. Я понял, в чем дело. Поле там не появляется, окей. Чё, попал? Не, не попал. Да ладно. Изи. Я и бронированного грохнул, и этого. Это самбо, ублюдки, блядь. Граната прям жестко я кинул. Чётенько. Сука. По жопе. За плохое поведение. По-любому тут что-то спрятали. Чё? Чё я взял? Такой звук был сейчас, будто я что-то взял. А, вот он. О боже. О боже, что с ним сделали? Где моя смола? Патроны вижу, кстати. О, я уже близко. Бать, я прошел уже там. Че еще жопу? О, новая глава. Откровение. Откровения. Так, мужик. Мужик. Мужик, дай. Дай патрон. Нет у тебя патронов. О.
Good luck trying to lock out someone wielding an alyx.
Неудачно попал. Так, ну сейчас будет у нас бойня. Вот это я вроде помню, бля. 9 глава. Тут у нас будет жопа. А, гранаты дают уже. Так, окей.
Whoa, Russell! Forge just took down the last substation.
Oh, let me see. Eli, the boss just took down the last substation. Brace yourself, Alex. It's gonna come down.
What the?
I've activated some sort of emergency backup.
Ебать.
Activated a backup.
Tell Alex there's no way that backup is stable. She can shut it down.
I heard him. So head towards those beams, right?
Right, that's gonna be the backup station.
I hope whoever's in there is worth it.
Блять, они ули раздолбали.
Nothing. I'm on my
Как
way.
тараканы поползли все.
The emergence from the zoo gave us an opportunity to present players with a dramatic vista and to show them how much progress they had made in the journey to the vault. This was challenging because the vault's position in the world was already determined to be above the parking garage, which the player would reach at the end of the map. But placing the vault correctly in support of that location left the vault looking too distant to create the dramatic view we wanted here. We also intended to portray the cutting of the vault's power cables by the Vortigons at this point, but having this take place at such a distant location was unclear and confused playtesters. The solution was to move everything closer. The vault looked more imposing looming above the player, and the effects of the Vortigons' cable cutting efforts were much clearer. All we needed then was a conceit to justify the two vault locations. The location here at the start of the map, and the eventual location at the end of the map. Around this same phase of development, we were in the process of defining exactly how the player would bring down the vault, and our solution to that problem also helped justify the two vault locations. Tractor beams are a familiar cliché in science fiction and often share a common visual style of an enveloping force field emitted net-like from a single point. Using a tractor beam as a combined failsafe device to catch the vault served us well here. It allowed us to prevent Alyx from being crushed by the vault dropped out of the sky when the Vortigons cut the final power cable, and it gave us a satisfactory mechanism for moving the vault to the location we needed to be at the end of the map. Throughout the map, the beam itself also serves as a beacon, ensuring that the players are always able to recognize their new goal, the tractor beam control station.
Ну шо, народ, погнали нахуй. Сейчас будет приколы. Да сука ты.
Lasso.
Да вставляй, блядь! Ты банашка, сука. Привет, Настя. Так, я съебал отсюда. Там подавитель. Блять. О, охуенно. What's going on here, блять? Пиздец происходит. Хоть патрон на пистолет есть, спасибо, блин. На все патроны на львов слил. Возьми, блядь, магазин. Заебал нахуй. Лови гранату нахуй. А, ну да. Минус граната, блядь. А, да, я там уже не возьму гранату. Нужно было здесь укрыться, да, понятно. Бля, такая хрень вообще. Блять, иди отсюда. YouTube смотреть, да, можно. И не только YouTube. Можно и оранжевый YouTube посмотреть. Можно и обычный YouTube посмотреть. Всякий можно YouTube смотреть. И в браузере посидеть. Короче, возможностей много. Не переживай. Ой, блядь, такая жопа. У меня хп пока есть, но в принципе я могу еще спотрелиться. Бля, как гранаты кидаются, это вообще забей. Вот это вот мне не понравилось. Жопа полная. Там артигонт, наверное. А я дробовик все равно возьму на всякий. Ага! Кто здесь?
Eli, come here. What is it, Russell? Listen to this.
Whoa, whoa. Shh. Okay, well, go get them. You get back to the entire planet in 7 hours. How is that taking so long? Oh, no, it's fine. I can wait. That's sarcasm. Well, I'm thrilled you thought that. Yes, that was sarcasm as well. And just to remind you, the thing I need to talk to your boss about is how we're running out of time. Well, what if I went and got my supervisor? Would that move the needle on this thing? No, that's the point. I am my supervisor. You're killing me.
Кстати, непонятно до сих пор, кто это разговаривает, даже после первого прохождения. Глянешь мой канал, слышишь мой стрёмный голос. А у меня стрёмный голос, кстати. Предатель.
The final twist of the game presented quite a few storytelling challenges for the writers. The game is long, much longer than a movie, and the surprise reveal of the G-Man at the end felt almost impossible to sustain over the entire experience. Everyone on the team assumed that through basic deduction, most players are going to figure it out along the way. So the solution, like in most good stories, was to just add more stuff, more details, more questions, and more nooks and crannies to the plot. The writers quickly realized that there was one big distracting name, Gordon Freeman, that would pull the players' attention away from any theories they may be cooking up on their own. We then realized that we could use the absence of the G-Man in the story, in the eerie parallels between the G-Man and Gordon's experiences at Black Mesa, to redirect player attention and propel the story towards the final act. If the player thought they had uncovered a new mission to save Gordon Freeman from stasis, then the twist at the end could be secure. To pull it off, the writers created a new, mysterious character, a scientist collaborating with the Combine. This addition came late in the project, so the writers relied on another tried-and-true tact. Base the character on an actor we're fond of, and then do our absolute best to cast and record with that person. The chosen actor had struck a particular tone with the writers. She has an easy, in-command confidence, and a smooth southern Missouri drawl. This not only sets her apart from the other characters in the Half-Life universe, but makes the character easy to hear on the page, which is incredibly important when time is short at the end of the project. And once she was in the studio, her pitch-perfect performance assured us that we'd made the correct decision. Of course, then the scene still had to be built. Level designers figured out what existing chunk of level track could be bumped out to fit the scene. The area we chose previously held some barnacles and a few light puzzle elements, which the designers weren't upset to lose. The level track had to be altered to funnel you into a place where the scene could unfold and the player could eavesdrop without getting a good look at the character. This served two purposes. One was that it would benefit the mystery for the scene to feel furtive and for the identity of the character to remain secret. But also, we could shroud the performance and the intricate facial animation necessary to bring a character to life, all in shadow, for the animators and the choreographers. Like in a lot of cases,
Да.
not doing the work.
Мне даже не рассказали,
was the
кто
correct
это
thing
мог
for both
быть
the story
в
and our
комментариях.
tight shipping schedule.
Хреново, ладно. Только не забудь. Ну, типа, я не забуду, но я не знаю ссылку на твой канал. Только название твоего канала есть, но, знаешь, по названию канала в Ютубе очень плохо ищется. Так что не знаю, не факт, если я не забуду.
Okay, great, finally, hi. We need to move the box or this thing is going to be Black Mesa all over again. Well, now I'm telling you it is ready. Look, if it's still here when she gets there, he's gone. What in the history of today makes you think you're going to stop her? Look, this guy we've got in there survived Black Mesa. He raised holy hell and then just disappeared. We finally caught him and you're just going to let him go again? Move the box.
Survived Black Mesa, then disappeared. Eli, they do have a super weapon.
God damn it, Russ, they got Gordon Freeman.
Oh, wow. That's good, right?
This is very, very good.
This is a miracle.
All right. So, let's go save Gordon Freeman. Oh, incoming. Hey, give me a second.
Сука, мне вот нравится этот момент. О, черт, меня спалили. Ай. Сука. Очень больно. Очень больно. Сука, мне хп нету. Сейчас кину, вот увидел. Так ссылки в чате не видны, если чё, Настя.
I'll be honest, people talk about him a lot, but I always just assumed he was dead.
Me too.
Hey, Dad? Are you there?
Yeah, what's up, Alex?
If Gordon survived Black Mesa, where's he been?
I don't know, but I bet it's a hell of a story.
Да нету ссылки, я же говорю, не... Любой, кто скидывает ссылки в чат, их не видно. Это не за то, что я там что-то запретил. Так что я не вижу ссылку, к сожалению. Пора подхилиться. Жесть. Полностью израсходовал. А как мне тогда показать? Ну, не знаю, в Discord зайди. У тебя же есть Discord? Можешь там скинуть в группу. Попробовать. Или в Telegram, не знаю. Да, блядь. Да ёпта. Чё застревают?
The purpose of this hideout was to give players a nice reward for being observant and exploring the environment. We wanted to highlight the story of scavengers living behind the quarantine wall, what their lives might look like, and why they might choose to live there. The person who lived here was referred to internally as the Combine Killer, imagined as a person with a grudge against the Combine who has chosen to eke out a living in the quarantine zone, spending their time exacting revenge on unsuspecting Combine patrols, perhaps eventually joining the organized resistance movement portrayed in Half-Life 2.
Дать название из моих видео, надеюсь, сможешь найти. Ну, скинь. Надеюсь, потом не забуду. Жесть. Чел тут развлекался, наверное. Водку хреначил, вот дают. Маскировочка, что надо. 38 смолы, кстати, пока что. Блять. Схавал? Молодец. Сюда иди. Сука. Блять, я дебил, сука! Нахуя я спрыгнул-то, блять? Шбанашка, блять. Надо было сначала смолу, блять, тпхнуть, а потом уже прыгать, блять. Сука, блять.
The purpose of this hideout was to give players a nice reward for being observant and exploring the environment. We wanted to highlight the story of scavengers living behind the quarantine wall, what their lives might look like, and why they might choose to live there. The person who lived here was referred to internally as the Combine. The purpose of this hideout was to give players a nice reward for being observant and exploring the environment. We wanted to highlight the story of scavengers living behind the quarantine wall, what their lives might look like, and why they might choose to live there. The person who lived here was referred to internally as the Combine Killer, imagined as a person with a grudge against the Combine who has chosen to eke out a living in the quarantine zone, spending their time exacting revenge on unsuspecting Combine patrols, perhaps eventually joining the organized resistance movement portrayed in Half-Life 2.
Сожрали кладбище, это одно из остальных видосов. Хорошо, хорошо. Буду в курсе. Хуя себе, блядь. Ты чё нахуй? Ты чё, червяк? Ебать. Я ж попал. Ох, плотные ублюдки теперь меня будут мучить. Тупо ненавижу, блядь. Больше не было. А мне точно сюда надо было прыгать? А, ну да. Стоп, что? Сука, блин. Прикалывают такие приколы, конечно. В игре. Спасибо за халявный лифт.
Once we get Gordon back, we can really get ambitious, don't you think, Russ? Maybe we could take down the Citadel.
Well, he saved humanity once. I'm willing to bet he can do it again.
And this time he won't have to do it alone.
Ай, блядь. Что за хуйня? Ебать, 43 смолы уже. Подожди, мне точно так надо идти? Ага. Смола. Самый внимательный человек в мире. Ну-ка, а там с той стороны было видно смолу? Вроде нет. Опа! Работники, блядь. Бля, с лазера в дом не целится, кстати. Чем так? Давай ты лучше приостановишься с игрой, не? Да, еще нормально, пока можно. А что такое? Смотреть надоело? Не, я пока не наигрался, короче. Так что я пока не приостановлюсь.
To address this audience, we created a spectator HUD, which displays the VR player's health, ammunition, resin, and the contents of their wrist pockets. This information is overlaid on the 3D scene in the desktop window, and lets viewers track the state of the player's resources, without having to rely on the player to look at their wrist or open up a menu. The spectator HUD started off as a tool used by the development team to display resources, as well as the state of controller buttons and other diagnostic information. An interesting side effect of this HUD was that it made playtests way more exciting to watch, because we as an audience had information the player wasn't necessarily aware of. For example, playtest observers might realize that a player had barely survived an encounter when the players themselves had never even checked their health. We even saw cases where players killed an enemy with their very last bullet without realizing it themselves. The highs and lows we felt watching our own playtests were something that we wanted to share with the streaming audience.
Не зря такое вели.
It's been exciting to see streamers using it in the wild.
Вот бы научиться рисовать женскую письку. Окей. Привет, солнце, как ты там? Нормально, играем. А ты как? Все окей? Все гуд? Ой, блядь. Нет, тут супер хард сейчас будет. Сегодня помог бате компьютер установить, переустановить. Скинул оставшиеся игры, перекинул свой новый SSD-шник со старого. Поел хинкали с кетчупом. И пошел стримить Half-Life Alyx. Сейчас кайфую. И пытаюсь решить эту дикую головоломку с дикими линиями. Блять, ну это вообще пиздец какой-то. Это... Чё это вообще? Это нормально? Это еще первая часть была. Херни. Блять! Мразь! Ух, сука, блять! Ух, сука, блять, блять, мало уебать тебя, а? Когда я беру, она ускоряется специально, как будто. Очень рада, что с тобой в порядке. Так, что ты переживаешь-то? Я же дома сижу. Что со мной произойдет-то? Как будто, не знаю, последний день живу. Так спрашиваешь постоянно. Единственное, что меня раздражает, это вот дерьмо. А так все окей. С этими линиями конченными. Вот это вот взлом, это вообще. По полчаса жди, пока вот это все проедет. Так, подожди, это только первая была? А не вторая случайно? Бля. Ну давай, блядь, подождем. Жесть какая-то. А кому сейчас легко? Дима Агр. Ну я злой, да, простите. Я вообще неадекват в последнее время.
Last one.
Ля какие.
What do you think they're doing in here?
Looks like they're milking the leggies.
Дует на гастиков, понятно. Оп, оп, оп. Оу, щит. Я пытаюсь в брюхо попасть. Наконец-то. А, все, понял. После выстрела он раскрывает. Вот так вот. Ой, блядь. Мужик, ты чё? Ты чё, мужик?
Russ, what do you think they're doing to Gordon Freeman in there?
That's a good question.
Are they, you know, sucking his brain out?
I think they're gonna move him off-world.
Well, either way, let's not find out. I'll get there before it happens.
Что за пельмени страшные? Это животные. Называются хинкали. Их можно кушать с кичунезом. Надеюсь. А может и нет. А где? Где магазин? Блять, ёбаная игра. Куда магазин пропал? Сука, я сейчас орать начну нахуй, блять! Где магазин? Сука, блять. Пиздец, блять. Вот я, сука, в руках его держал, он ко мне прилетел. Как он там опять оказался? Пиздец какой-то, блять. Очень смешно, блять. Очень. На пельмени больше похоже. Ну, пельмени одобряем, кстати. Опа. А как это достать? А как это достать? А, я понял, там люк, который можно открыть потом. Ебать ты пельмень. Оу. Оу. Оу, май. Это вроде жопка его была, кстати. А, вот они, глаза. Это глазки его. Вот они где находятся. Понял. Хинкали странно действуют. Это не хинкали, это, видимо, я уже переиграл. Я уже почти 3 часа играю. Пона мать, блять. Так. Так. Вопрос. А, все понял. Люк для этого и предназначался, походу. Ой, господи, так резко встал. Изи. Эй, а где моя смола? Куда она пропала? Так. Энергоблок. А где смола моя? Ну как? А, вот она. Нашлась. Детка нашлась. Детка хочет бум-бум. Правильно? Где... А, гранаты нету, что ли? Блять. Лох. Схавано. Спасибо, Барнакл. Очень помог.
Russ, what's the deal with the crowbar?
Oh, you mean Gordon Freeman's crowbar?
Yeah.
Oh, Alex. He fought his way out of Black Mesa with nothing but that crowbar.
No way.
It's true. Well, it's true that that's what they say. You know, nobody knows for sure.
Well, when I get him out, let's give him a gun.
Yes, not mine. I'm out of the gun lending business. Okay?
Да, больше не даю в долг пистолет. Да ладно тебе. Мы тут человека спасаем, и он это жалуется, что ему пистолет собрали. Блять. Пусть будет. У вас дожди каждый день? Ага, у нас сегодня жара. Третий день. У нас жара началась, наконец-то, блин. Сегодня опять солнце шпарило, как дико. Так, каску не забываем. Не забываем про касочку. Здесь ничего нету. Так, мне 48 смолы, кстати. Можно что-то качнуть. Можно что-то прокачать. Прокачать. Кстати, Ксюша, жди новый ролик по фазмофобии. Скоро. Я не знаю, когда я его сделаю только. Когда-нибудь сделаю. Так, стоп. Может так надо? Нет. Ага. Вот это прикол. Возможно, мне надо... Нет, не так. Или так. Или вот так. Нет, не так. А как, блядь, ёп... Сука. Вот так вот. Так, следующие два. Вот так. Вот так. И... понял. Сложная схема. Недалеко чела убили. Жестко. Маньяк, что ли, опять завелся? Лазерный прицел. Здесь я все прокачал. Короче, остался дробовик. Бля, гранатомет есть. Прокачай гранатомет, наверное. Половина заряда. Мужика 2 дочки маленьких было. Блин. Земля. Нихуя себе. Потяните ручку вперед, чтобы подготовить гранатомет, или стреляйте обычными патронами. Ебать. Вот это гранатомет. Ох, ебать мой хуй. Так, давай. Нажмите, чтобы выстрелить гранатой. Снимите ее, чтобы... Так, а как? А, то есть отменить вот так вот можно. Охуительно. Блять. Вот это да. Да. Прикол, прикол. Мне это нравится. Посох сделал, какой я Мика. Буду косплеить теперь. Подожди, у Мика есть посох. Может, ты имел в виду это? Эя? А не Мика. У меня же нету посоха. Батя пушки прокачал жестко. Да я понял, как уже что делать. Игра мне подсказывает каждый раз одно и то же. О, не зря гранатомет прокачал. Сейчас понадобится. Только я не знаю, в какой момент его использовать, потому что у меня будет тут дикая жопа. О, ну тут как раз патроны дают. Я забыл, что тут максимум. 2 хилочки, полная хп. Сейчас будет бойня. Бой на станции для цистерн.
Creating a climactic battle that capped off the antlion combat proved to be a challenging design problem. We wanted to create a sustained combat experience that was substantial enough to challenge players who had refined their skills against the antlions. But simply throwing a large number of antlions at the player all at once was not a particularly engaging experience, nor was it compatible with our established combat balancing. Rather than containing the player in a restricted space and spawning waves of enemies, we wanted to keep the player engaged and moving through a gauntlet of constant pressure toward a goal. To do this, we needed an arena with a clear linear flow and a porous layout that would allow the player to maintain sight of their goal while being flanked by swarms of antlions as they move toward it. This tanker yard, which we had originally built for a narrative scene that was cut from the game, had the properties we were looking for. The long tanker cars lead toward the intended direction of travel, and their positioning requires the player to pay careful attention to their sides and rear as they advance. The combine tractor beam tower is framed at the end of the tracks, providing a clear goal for the player. The placement of the glowing red sign in the direction of the tractor beam was also a deliberate decision, a technique used by the environment artist to subconsciously pull players in the desired direction via visual contrast, even in the event that they've momentarily lost their bearings in the chaos of the battle. The pacing of the combat here was carefully balanced to leave most playtesters on the brink of being overwhelmed and feeling like they made it through by just the skin of their teeth. It took many iterations of enemy placement, ammo and item placement, and player path adjustments to achieve this balance. We ultimately settled on a design that featured a steady stream of advancing antlions, with antlion spitters placed at the far end of the space applying enough pressure to prevent players from rushing toward the goal. Combine soldiers up on the raised platforms divert player attention to the right-hand flank and provide verticality in target prioritization, adding to the...
Так, сейчас отойду на секу. Да я тут. Я в туалет отходил. Я же сказал, сейчас вернусь. Есть. Капец, там видеокарта с ума сходит. Короче, сейчас будет прикольный бой. Со всеми сразу. Детей воровать пойдешь опять, что ли? Ты... Давай, удачи. Так. Все удобнее стало. О, сейчас будет жестко. Блять, шлем возьми! Сука, пидорасина ебаная, сука, тупорылая, блять! Закрой, сука! Пизда мне, нахуй! И в пизду отсюда. Давай, подходи, сука. Блять, почему в такие моменты я сильно напрягаюсь? Блять, у меня хп нету. Да, блять! Ебанашка, сука, я тебя разъебу нахуй скоро! Блять, почему нахуй, когда спокойно все делаю, блять? А в экстренных ситуациях быстрее делается, нихуя не срабатывает эта залупа, блять! Чё за хуйня, блять, а? Контроллеры, блять, ебаные нахуй, или игра, я хуй знает, блять. Почему нахуй быстрее делаешь, блять, нихуя, блять, не срабатывает? Пиздец, нахуй. Блядь, иди нахуй, иди нахуй, иди нахуй, иди нахуй, иди нахуй, иди нахуй, блядь. И не ебет, что там говоришь, блядь, уж. Сука, блядь, вообще пиздец. блядь! Я сейчас взорвусь нахуй, вот серьезно, я сейчас взорвусь. Сколько надо стрелять по этой хуете, блядь? Я, блядь, попадаю, я сейчас нахуй, вот серьезно нахуй, я попадаю, блядь, по этой залупе, блядь. Прям в нее, блядь, стреляю, она отрикошетит, блядь, еще, сука. Я нахуй удалю эту игру, короче, потом. Мне нервы сдают. Сука, у меня хп еще нету, блядь. Хорошо, давай поиграемся. Подходите, суки ебаные. Ух ты, сука, блядь! Крыса ебаная, иди отсюда! Сука. Пиздец. Да ну нахуй! Катка кидаться? А, ну да, ага. Это меня спасло бы точно. Благодаря катке я выживаю, походу, реально. Патроны можно, пожалуйста? Спасибо. Не то. Не то, блять. Кстати, они все тут разбросаны, патроны. Бля, просто сзади подходит этот ублюдок. Пипец. Я понял, last one уже. L1 просто. Батя бешеный просто, когда на меня что-то идет. Бля, гранаты не было, блядь. Вот зря я гранаты использовал. Пиздец. Ага, я уже и так обосрался, спасибо. Посрал мне. Патрона зато нашел, зашибись. Много ли так патронов мне дали? Музыка так и продолжает бить по ушам. Как будто еще враги остались. О, да, вот это я точно помню. Это будет сейчас весело очень. Это будет убийственно весело. Остается только эта хрень. Так, смысл это вообще от этого, кстати. Так. Заклевание нельзя сделать, кстати. А, точно, я же... Все, я вспомнил, как надо сделать. Вот так вот. Так, стоп. Все, точно. Я так долго думал над этим в прошлый раз. Чё, когда ютубчик пойдем чекать? Ну, вообще, не знаю.